Well, happy Friday, everyone. It is August 25th, 2023. I'm Brett Nackman with College Autism Network, and we're really glad to have all of you here for another Canvas meeting. Our feature presenter today is Dr. Carolyn O'Laughlin from St. Louis University, who's going to be talking about their dissertation work on autistic student persistence. So I think we're in for a treat. And we appreciate folks' patience too with the rescheduling of today's presentation to make sure that that Carolyn is healthy and happy to present, which is most important for everybody here. If you haven't been to Canvas before, this is a space where we meet every month, say for a couple of months during the year when we take a break, and we have a guest presenter talk about their research generally related to autism in higher education. Sometimes it's a little bit more broad in nature. And it's a great way to kind of get out some early findings of studies, a preview of what's to come, and sometimes an encapsulation of some of the scholarship to date in this very unique space that we all occupy. If you're not already in our meeting agenda, we invite you to have your name recorded there so that we have that documented, and we'll have the video recording from today available to folks sometime next week. And that's also on our YouTube channel. So if you're not subscribed to College Autism Network on YouTube, that's where you can see many of our past presentations. We're going to start today, as we often do, with a little icebreaker activity. We know many of you are affiliated with colleges or universities or are connected with college students in your lives. So we pose this question for you to respond to in the chat or verbally contribute if you'd like. What do you get most excited about with a new school year or a new academic year? So that is the prompt for today. And I'm sure folks are very much contemplating what stands out here in terms of most exciting things. Maybe it's not parking. Parking is always a challenge, I think.
How much I'm not excited about parking was the first thing that occurred to me. But the next thing I'm excited about is that I live in a small college town, and the grocery store really kind of brings back some of their offerings when the students come back into town.
Yes, very important. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing renewed energy, meeting new people, welcoming back students. Those are some common contributions here. Sasha's excited to be going on sabbatical. Tony's excited about potentially finishing their dissertation. That's very exciting. Great. What else? Clarissa says people returning to campus. Yeah, it is often quiet in the summer. It's quite a dichotomy from the rest of the year. Change in weather, Lauren mentions, for sure. I think it depends on where you are in the country and what temperatures one prefers, but for sure. Well, thank you for chiming in there. We're going to just share a few general updates here at College Autism Network and then turn it over to all of you. If you have any contributions or updates or things you want to bring to the conversation with the team, as always, make sure that you are on our Canvas listserv. That is how you are apprised primarily of our forthcoming presentations, meeting notes and meeting recordings as well as sharing resources. Folks sharing details about their research studies if they're seeking recruitment, the release of new articles. There was one that was dropped a few weeks ago from Jonathan Vincent and colleagues in the UK, among others. So a great way to be connected with folks. We also invite you to be a formal member of College Autism Network, which affords you certain benefits, certain resources, and reduced registration rates for the College Autism Summit. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to our esteemed leader, Lee Williams.
Thank you, Brett. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. It's a rainy Friday afternoon here in Mystic, Connecticut. So this is a bright spot in my day. I want to mention two things. One is in a couple of weeks on September 6th, we are going to have a conversation with Emily Rothman from Boston University. And Emily is the co-creator of the HEARTS curriculum, which you may have heard of. HEARTS is, how do they describe it, as it's a 12-session workshop for autistic adults who would like to learn about and talk about healthy friendship and dating relationships. And so this is an opportunity to really talk with Emily about this curriculum. If you want to consider perhaps recommending it to students, it would be a great opportunity for you to learn more about it, about how it was developed, how facilitators are trained, and about the research that has gone on to develop it and continues. So I'm just going to, this is free. Free for members of the College Autism Network. You can go to the link on our website here now or later, and you just, if you're a member, you just sign up for it today. If you're not a member, you should be. So we hope maybe this will encourage you to formally join CAN. The second thing, of course, is that in less than 2 months, we're going to be hosting our 7th College Autism Summit. And looking at the screen here, I see some familiar faces and names that I know you're going to be there. So the summit is an opportunity for researchers and practitioners, for employment specialists, for self-advocates, to come together and really engage in some meaningful conversations about autism in a higher education setting. And we'll be in Nashville in October, the 18th to the 20th. And here's the link for that. It's where you can register. If you already have registered, I encourage you to quickly book a hotel room if you want to get that conference rate, because there are only a couple rooms left. Not that I want to start a stampede, but yeah, just a few left. So I look forward to seeing you all in Nashville in less than 2 months. Thanks, Brett.
Thank you, Lee. Yeah, very excited about it. I know the countdown has begun for me as well. And yes, the Foothills is definitely another venue for folks to engage virtually. So at this point, we turn it over to all of you. Are there resources or announcements or news items that you want to share with the community, questions that you have? We invite you to insert those in the meeting agenda, in the chat, or if you'd like to verbally share them. I see that one has already been incorporated, that one of you read over an article yesterday that was published in Advances in Neurodevelopment Disorders on neurodiversity in practice. So it looks like that they found that to be an interesting piece to review. Yeah, Eleanor, I see, who presented to us earlier in the year. Do you want to share anything verbally about that, or do you just want to keep the info in the chat?
Yeah, hi, sorry. Yeah, I put most of it in the chat already. I just wanted to say it was really exciting for me because it was my first author paper, and I wrote it together with an autistic graduate who consulted on the project, as well as my then supervisor and my current supervisors. So it was a very multinational collaboration on this. And yeah, the journal just released the August issue today, and we are on the cover of that. So really exciting.
Congratulations, that's awesome. You should definitely put it on our Canvas listserv as well, so further folks can be exposed to that. And Jeff, who's been part of our CAN community, is starting at Berkeley as their first neurodiverse program manager tomorrow. Oh, that's great, Jeff. Congratulations. Other good news to share. I think it's hard to, I feel like both of those were almost mic drop moments with the publication and new position. Ariel mentions, I just started a new position at Michigan State University, which is wonderful, in the Center for Bioethics and Social Justice. Congratulations. Wow, lots of good ways to start off the semester. Yeah, and Jika mentions that they're the research assistant. Wonderful. Glad to hear it. Okay, well, if there are other items folks want to share, feel free to do that in the chat or the meeting agenda. And certainly for those of you who are publishing or working on research studies, you definitely want to put that on the Canvas listserv so that it can be spread out to folks even beyond the context of our conversation today. So at this point, let's turn it over to our guest presenter for today. So we have Dr. Carolyn O'Laughlin, who's now an assistant professor, a big title jumped at St. Louis University. So Carolyn, it's over to you to talk about acts of resilience and resistance, persistence by autistic college students. I also like the rhyming of all of that. So that was a good title.
Isn't that great? Thank you. All right, so now it says I'm sharing my screen. Does that seem accurate to all of you?
Yes.
It is shared. Okay, and you can hear me talking. Yes. All right, so let me move you forward so I can see what I'm doing too. One moment. Make you all just a little bit smaller. All right, well, man, I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm a teacher and I've worked in higher ed for a long time. I'm used to presenting in front of people, but just suddenly I'm getting nervous as like the movie stars of my, references page are involved here, So I have read, many of your work, and I'm excited to introduce my work, and, I appreciate your you're listening to my little humble research here, but I'm proud of it, and I hope that it helps you as well. So I've just been hired as an assistant professor at St. Louis University, which just recently hired. So I'm very excited about that. I teach mostly in the undergraduate student core, but I'm also part of the higher education program, and my research is focused on this work, right, on autism and neurodivergence in college students. So hopefully I'll be able to continue to do that in this additional role. So great. So, and the College Autism Network has been very supportive of me the whole time. So I'm really, man, I'm so grateful to be here. So I'll present my research. This was my dissertation. I was tinkering with slides as of 20 minutes ago. So if we see random weird stuff on slides, I missed it. So sorry, we'll just pretend that we don't. So what I'd like to do first, it's not progressing, is it? Let me adjust here. It says I'm screen sharing, and I want to say from beginning, resume. All right, sometimes I talk too much, and then PowerPoint thought I was done. All right, did it adjust for you guys?
Not quite yet, Carolyn.
Oh, rats.
Unless other people are seeing something different from me.
I want to resume the slideshow.
Now
it's switched.
Still looks the same to me. Now it's switched. I was delayed.
Now it's switched. All right. So the first thing I would like to introduce is, who am I anyway? And as a qualitative researcher, I mean, that's part of the game too, right? So I want to talk to you a little bit about my own identities and how that guided me in this research. So I've been a higher education professional for more than 20 years, and I've worked in institutions from music conservatories. So I saw that about Berklee College of Music. I didn't work there, but I worked at a different place. From music conservatories to Ivy League, I worked at Columbia University. I've worked at small liberal arts colleges. I've worked with religiously affiliated, and I've worked at a community college. So across the gamut of institutions is where I have worked, and I've always had autistic students in all of those areas, as a parent, so I'm the parent of an autistic teenager. He's 16 now, but when he was diagnosed at age 3, I went all in. Like, I wanted to know everything that I could about autism, but I really struggled to find information from an autistic perspective. So even in my professional roles in higher ed with people that I really respected and felt like they were giving me great information, I often felt like anything about autism was really focused on deficits, on problematic behaviors, or on compliance related issues from the institution. Essentially, like, what do we have to do to manage this? And that just felt I didn't like how that felt. I often found myself in rooms with experts with lots of guidance about skill development and therapies and acceptable social practices. But I'm also a queer woman who came out in a working class Catholic family in the 90s. So I also had lots of adults, well-intended adults, with lots of suggestions about the ways that I should live my life to be more socially acceptable. So the connection there just felt so clear to me. When my son was diagnosed and when I was listening to the words about, well, the words from the people that I was going to for advice, they weren't what I wanted to hear. So I struggled with that a bit. So I'm sorry, I clicked my mouse, but I clicked the wrong button, and onward we go. So that's me. Oh, come on. I'm sorry. My slideshow makes me keep resuming the slideshow. I just want to do the slideshow. Now what will happen if I click? And that was me as a little kid in my Catholic school in like third grade. So as I decided to pursue I also have ADHD, right? So I am a neurodivergent parent in a neurodivergent family, with all sorts of issues involved here. So as I decided to pursue my PhD, come on now, why is it not moving? I don't know what's happening, y'all. I think I'm going to move I'm just going to keep this a little more carefully. I just want to proceed with my slideshow. I don't know. Maybe I just have to press a different button.
It's moving, Carolyn.
It's moving. Okay. Thank you so much. Sorry about the confusion there. Now there's so much stuff on my little screen that it gets confusing. So as I thought about what I wanted to do, but I skipped a slide here. This is a slide I want to see. Why is it not showing? I want to unhide this slide. Okay. Now I'm going to go backwards. What is happening? I am really sorry. Let me try again.
All good. Sometimes technical issues happen.
Yeah, it's really throwing me off because it's not doing what I want it to do at all. I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare in just a second here. I think that might be my best bet.
Okay.
So let me just let me close my PowerPoint. Maybe that is the issue. And then reopen it. I apologize for that.
All right. Sometimes these things are fickle, and we had tested the technology beforehand and it was fine.
We
So
sure did.
It might be just acting a little bit funky.
Yeah. So let me just reopen it and then I will reshare. Okay, now I'm going to go to Zoom and share screen. And share. Okay, so we already said all this part. I don't have to do that again. So I will click forward.
There must just be a delay. There you go. It's working.
There must be a delay. All right. So we know that there are more autistic college students coming to college. We also know that they don't persist or graduate at the same rate as their non-autistic peers. So as I've just introduced myself as someone who was interested in autistic voices, and I wanted to hear from like autistic perspectives about their own experience. When I went to pursue my PhD, my research question then became, what experiences do autistic college students identify as leading to their college persistence? So the key terms and frameworks that worked within my study included identity first language, kind of a neurodiversity paradigm, subjective well-being, and that is the studying of what's going well. So I didn't want to study what are the problems, and I wanted to study what is working. Now, what are the problems, of course, also came up. And it was a critical framework as well, but I was critical more of institutions than of individuals, right? So academic ableism was an additional kind of key term that guided the study. I used concepts from critical disability theory, which is, focused on liberal justice that focus on inclusion. On critical autism theory, which reframes assumptions of ability for autism, and also of CRIP theory, which challenges the concepts of normal, kind of blends critical disability theory and queer theory. So these were things that were all in my concepts as I developed my study. And my conceptual framework, I used Schlossberg's transition theory. And this is an odd picture to use for Schlossberg's transition theory, but it just made it make sense for me. So my kids are kids who we played with these marble runs for like far too long. In fact, they're 13 and 16. I still have marble run in the living room. It's that, available to us. So we played with these marble runs for a long time. And when I was thinking about college transition, for the majority of my life, the college transition, I have been kind of the person as a higher ed professional. I worked in new student orientation, I worked in college housing, I worked in conduct, I've worked in all sorts of different areas where I was guiding students' transitions through college as the institution. So I was the one moving the blocks around in the marble transition. For my study, I was not so interested in studying the blocks or moving the blocks or critically evaluating how the blocks are. I want to think about that, but what I really wanted to hear was, what is the experience of the autistic student moving through that run, right? And so what's the experience of the marble? So that's the way that I focused, that I began to conceptualize the work that I was going to do. But I also really wanted to think about the fact that I am not autistic. So I wanted to highlight like autistic protagonists. I wanted to hear from autistic people, but I am not autistic, and I'm aware of that. And I wanted to think about, how can I amplify autistic experience, but also bridge those experiences into changes that we can make within professional practice. So in order to do that in a way that felt, I struggled with this a lot, right? So I'm not autistic. Should I study autistic people? Maybe I should not make that my dissertation, because I kind of need to do that on my own. Maybe I focus on that later. I really struggled with, how am I going to do that? And then I had to get out of my own way. And so I really worked to center autistic voice and experience and de-centering myself. And I was very self-critical in the ways that I collected data, in the ways that I analyzed the data, and the ways that I presented the data, so that I was the most respectful of not being that expert in the room that was saying things that just kind of missed the mark, and instead really trying to say, when I've spoken with autistic people about the expertise of their own experience, here are the things that I began to understand. So my study design and methods, it was a narrative inquiry study. It moved a little bit into phenomenology as I proceeded on, but it was a narrative inquiry study. I followed the Aspire guidelines for the ethical research with autistic participants, which was so helpful to have some information like lined out for me, so that I had something to evaluate, for and against what I was doing. I had 2 virtual 1-hour semi-structured interviews where we worked together to co-create a timeline. I was really cognizant of the double empathy problem with autistic folks and non-autistic folks in communication. And I really wanted to decenter myself in these interviews. And so the timeline helped me to do so, because there were several built-in spots for me to say, do I understand what you're saying correctly? Is that how you want me? Like, now we're looking at this together on the timeline. Does this represent what your experience was? Yes or no? How would you like to present it in a different way? The other thing I wanted to say is, at first I was thinking about like, oh, I need to think about accessibility. And I do need to think about accessibility and accommodations and what sorts of things do I include. But I kind of flipped that, and it was about accessibility for me. Like, what are the tools that I need to include so that the expertise of these participants is accessible to me, and less about what do I need to include so that the autistic participants can participate in the study the way that my committee wants them to do it, or IRB asks the questions. Like, when I flipped that to say, like, no, the right way for me to access this expertise are to include, for example, I sent the questions ahead of time. I included some plain language recruitment statements. I'm sorry, I lost track of I'm still there for you. Okay, so my notes went away. That was my issue there. I included financial incentive for participants. I included regular breaks to confirm understanding. We did it over Zoom so we could have closed captioning. I had participants who preferred to respond to the questions via chat, which was interesting. But as I thought about how am I going to collect the data, when I really thought about what are the things that I need to include so that I can access the expertise, those were things that I thought to include. In order to recruit participants, I did use my own network. I've worked in higher ed a long time. I know a lot of folks, right? But the College Autism Network shared information. I shared information on the listserv, and the Autism Self-Advocacy Network also agreed. They kind of vetted what I was doing and agreed to share my information with their campus leader, like student leadership group. I can't remember the name off the top of my head here. The criteria for the participation was that folks identified as autistic with or without a formal diagnosis, that they have completed at least 1 year and are moving into at least a second year of college. So it didn't matter if it was full-time or part-time or whatever, but if they thought of themselves as I'm moving into my second year of college, they could be part of my study, and that they were in a matriculated college program. At this time, that's what I was interested in, was like not a parallel program, but a matriculated program. In the end, I did end up with 8 participants. I also, as part of my study design, anything I could automate, I automated so that we didn't have to go back and forth over and over. There's a lot of, for myself, I struggle with the executive functioning sometimes of like, now I got to get you on the schedule. I replied and said I was available. When are you? Anything I could automate, I automated. So, reminders, and, you can just pick a time on my schedule, and then confirmations, anything I could automate, I did. So I ended up with 8 participants. All of them participated all the way through. And there was a lot of variance around gender. In these 8 participants, I had 3 men, 2 women, and 3 folks who identified as non-binary or transgender. The institutional type varied greatly. I had folks from a music conservatory, community college, like large research one, religiously affiliated. I had a variety of institutional type and geographic location. We had folks from the South, from the West Coast, from the East Coast, the Midwest, North and South. So I did get some good variance through that. And so as I interviewed them with these timelines, I interviewed them twice. In the first interview, we really focused on the timeline. I want to know, what are the experiences that you had? And in the second, we focused a little less on the timeline, but then we had this common framework that we could refer back to. And I asked additional questions about how they felt about those experiences, or we dug into those a little bit more. So when I did my narrative analysis, I had the transcripts from those interviews. I had the timelines, and also the notes that I took in the meantime. So as part of my narrative analysis, I used Jochelson and Hammock's narrative analysis process, which is kind of a 5-step process, but it didn't quite work for me because, again, I was focused on, I really wanted to pull respect to the autistic individuals that were the protagonists that I was looking for in my research. And so what I decided to do is I did the first couple of rounds of coding. I read for emerging themes or cultural narratives. Then I wrote a narrative summary of each participant. So I took, our interviews, the notes I took, our timeline, and then I wrote essentially an introduction to each character to each participant, and I sent them that introduction and asked for their feedback. So that do I understand you correctly? Like, do I understand your experiences? Am I talking about them in the way that, you know, gives credence to what you want to say? All of them responded back. I got a couple of like little adjustments, but for the most part, people were touched that I included that, and that I captured their experiences. So that was kind of neat. So then, as I did my part 2 analysis, I went back to all of those emerging codes and, you know, narrative coding. But I also included my narrative summary for each one as part of my analysis, and included some different coding. And as I was thinking through how am I going to present this information, one of the things that continued to show is that students, when they talked about their experiences, frequently used theater language to talk about it. They talked about masking, performance, acting, scripting. I mean, lots of theater terms were used to talk about their experience. And when I think about, I was kind of looking for autistic protagonists, what made sense to me was to present that research using theater terms. So in my last bit, I did some dramaturgical coding, and as I wrote my the shared narrative, it's not a play, but I used concepts from theater to structure my findings.
Carolyn, sorry to interrupt here. I don't think your slides are advancing. We're still on the study design and methods slide.
Oh, look at that. I'm sorry about that. Oh, resume slideshow. We'll move forward. So here was my recruitment and selection, which I talked about there. So there's my 8, and they varied by gender and institutional type and geographic location. My narrative analysis, I used Josselson and Hammock. And so I did coding for emerging themes and then narrative themes. Then I wrote a narrative summary of each of those participants. And then I sent that. I called it member checking, but it was further than that, right? It was like, is your story accurate here for me to, before I add it to a shared story, is this your story? They're advancing now, right, Brett?
Yes, all good.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So then after I heard back from them that they agreed, that was another point of, am I understanding our communication correctly? I did some additional coding in order to structure it. And I then wrote the shared narrative using theater terms like acts and scenes, etc. So my findings after all of my interviews with folks, the 3 main findings included this concept of belonging, a concept which I call an act, the belonging, relevance, and making space. I also, because I had some, you know, loosey-goosiness, because I developed it, you know, I wrote it in these theater terms, included a prologue about mental health, because while I wouldn't say, my research question was, what experiences led to your persistence? And the mental health stories I got along the way would not answer that question positively, right? I mean, there were lots of narratives about significant mental health challenges along the way. There were also a lot of narratives about how folks coped with those mental health challenges and coped with the struggles they had along the way. I didn't feel those needed to be captured, but they didn't answer my research question. So I kind of bound those in a prologue and an epilogue that I'm not going to really go into here, but that feels like further research that I'd like to do in the future. But for now, I want to talk about my next slide, which is belonging. So Act 1, belonging. All right, it went to it. So I'll talk about the scenes in just a second here. But one of the students said, I navigate all the common college challenges with the bonus of navigating structures and spaces that were not designed with me in mind, or were originally designed to leave me out. So that was like a direct pull quote that I felt was significant. So when students talked about belonging, there were 3 kind of questions that they asked. So first, and let me back up for a moment, Strayhorn in 2018 told us that belongingness is the result of a cognitive evaluation of environment. Like you cannot just say to an environment, I belong. The environment is giving you messages about whether you belong or not. And your feeling of belongingness is the result of you evaluating what they're telling you. So autistic students gave me these participants gave me the questions that they asked to evaluate whether or not they belong. First, they said, is my experience centered or represented at all? Like, or am I totally sidelined or not represented in any way? Second, do I have to mask while I'm here? Do I have to constantly be on my best behavior? Do I have to be so conscious, meta-conscious of the ways that I'm interacting in every class, et cetera? Or can I be authentic and people will accept me for that? Those were questions that were asked. And the other, which was somewhat, I don't know that it was surprising to me, but their words that they used were really strong. Another was, am I appreciated in this environment or do I feel accommodated? And they kind of said, accommodated in this like wah, wah, wah way. And when they talked about feeling appreciated, they talked about feeling welcome, valued, seen, recognized, deserved, acknowledged. I have integrity. Those were the words that were used when they were talking about being appreciated. And when they talked about accommodated and accommodations, which often in my professional environment, people are pretty proud of the accommodations that we are thinking about. But students talked really about feeling very othered, like it was a mistake that they were there, or it was a mistake that they were asking for anything, or anything that they were going to do was a mistake. They felt like they were not believed. One student kept referring to having to show their papers like they were a dog. They talked about accommodations as a crutch, or like, yes, okay, I'm in the, like I have an asterisk by my name everywhere I go. So that was really insightful to me as students talked about their experience of belonging. Those are the questions that they are asking as they are evaluating whether they belong in our environments as a student affairs professional or not. So the next act I found, oh, look, I said that I didn't move through the words. So this is the graphic that I created. So when they talked about appreciated, those are the positive words. When they talked about being accommodated, there were really negative words. The next act that I found is this act of relevance. Essentially, does this matter? So the high impact, so if in belonging, they're asking, like, do I matter in this environment? Relevance is their evaluation of, does this matter to me? So does what the college is offering even fit what I want to do, right? Do I even care about this? So the first category, the first scene in my, subcategory, whatever, a sub theme, was about high impact practices. Students talked very highly of the high impact practices that they were involved with, like internships and individual research with professors, collaborative projects, on-campus employment. People were very positive about those high impact practices. They did also say that there are frequently folks who discourage them from doing them because they're hard, right? Maybe you should, maybe before you get an outside internship, you should try this kind of practice round of that. But the students were like, I don't know that I'm ever going to graduate out of the practice round. Like, I think I maybe just need to have the internship and have the results of that. If I didn't do it well, I'll learn from that. So, but students spoke very, very highly of their high impact practices when they were really able to articulate the ways that what the college was offering, those internships, those experiences fit with what they wanted to, who they wanted to be. It helped with their learning. In another thing that they talked about regarding relevance was a real struggle with like mismatched policies or assumptions of policies or of administrators regarding the motivation of an autistic student for not following the rules. One student talked about a struggle in the dining hall, for example. So during COVID, dining hall, it's all grab and go, come get your to-go container, leave. And so that was their experience. And then COVID restrictions in their state were eliminated. And so the dining hall was open for regular business now. So now it's an all you can eat in the dining hall. So they had a terrible time. They couldn't, like, I just really want to do the grab and go. But the folks in the dining hall said, we can't let you have that accommodation unless you have like an official accommodation from disability services. Like we can't figure out to-go container unless you have official accommodation. But that official accommodation requires, as you know, like now I have to go to the doctor. I have to have this all fit in a different way, when it seems like maybe we could just think about this in a more positive way. We could be more flexible at the get out. Another student had issues regarding accommodations, and I think you're going to steal, like if you record what's going to happen in that class, you could post that on the internet, you could sell that. The student was like, but I'm not going to do that. But when people had a lack of understanding about accommodations, students really felt targeted by those things, and really felt like certainly this policy doesn't matter, and doesn't understand what I am. And if you would just say plainly that you don't want me to sell it on the internet, then I wouldn't sell it. Like I would not, then we know I'm not going to do it. So people struggled with that. Also, students talked about, I mean, there were only 8, so I don't think I have a whole theory forever, but there were certainly categories as students were determining, does this matter to me, yes or not, yes or no? Students early on were talking about like having to endure some things. If I want to be an engineering major, then I'm going to have to endure all of these math classes. Then as a next question, starting to question this as like, well, maybe I don't have to just endure it. Like maybe I don't want to be an engineering major, or maybe this is just the wrong math class, or maybe I need to think different, or maybe this is the wrong institution. But like, I acknowledge that my enduring of this thing, where I'm kind of miserable through it, doesn't have to be the way that I think about it. Like maybe I need to think about changing something. So then students kind of talked about this questioning of, does this matter to me or not? Then I moved into, there were other students who were a little further along and had made a change. Like maybe they changed their major, maybe they dropped that class and took a different, took that math class with a different teacher. Maybe they switched schools, but they were in kind of an adjusting area of, it's not just that I have to endure these tasks, these academic tasks, but now I can wonder, like, maybe these aren't the right tasks for me. Here's how I can adjust so that there's better alignment. And then there were students who really talked about thriving, right? Who talked about, I can really dig into research when it's something that I'm interested in, and when I can see how it's something that I'm interested in, how it's something the institution wants me to do, and how it's going to help me in my future. Like they really dug in and got a tremendous amount of work done. So that was interesting as I listened to people's different narratives, that they kind of fell into those categories. So that's a finding that I think is interesting as part of relevance. I'm going to move forward. I did that one. What am I going to see next? And my third act that I talked about was this concept of making space, which Brett, I think, fit in with some of your, kind of guided, I don't know, some of your research guided me into that space too. So now I'm saying relevance.
Carolyn, yeah, I'm not seeing.
I know, there's
yeah.
a delay here.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry about that.
I'm sorry, y'all. So now if I go into making space.
Yep, it's showing.
So students talked about existence as resistance. And here are some quotes that they have. I hate the choice to protest or resist what was taken. I hate that the choice to protest or to resist was taken from me. It was just a reality forced on me, but I'm reclaiming it, living my life as a protest. I'm moving forward by choice. Or maybe I'm pushing boundaries because the relationship changed, or I don't know, I don't feel as responsible for their feelings. Or maybe I don't feel as responsible for their feelings, or I don't care because the relationship changed because I'm pushing the boundaries. And a third person who was talking about this making space was, I'm just going to be who I want to be, and I don't have to adhere to anyone else's expectations for me. So the making space scenes that I talked through, one was students talked about their developing relationships with other people. Another way that people made space was developing boundaries through self-advocacy. Like perhaps I'm making space within this relationship for myself, but perhaps I'm also making space in this relationship with some distance for myself. And the third was developing community and autistic space through advocacy. So those were categories within this kind of making space for myself in college that people talked about as leading to their persistence. So I'm toward the end here of my slides. But what does this mean then for higher ed practice? When I think about belonging and, the question, do I matter? So if Strayhorn defines it as the result of a cognitive evaluation, these participants in this study gave language to how they're evaluating it. So how can we center autistic experience as higher ed professionals? How do we center autistic experience in a different way, in the way we present ourselves on media, and the way, our students on our websites, our students, like, how do we center some autistic experience? When I think about relevance, or does this matter? I'm actually working on a book chapter right now about academic advising. So students who found things highly relevant, their determination of relevance impacted the way that they approached academic demands. So did they just endure an academic demand, or did they thrive in an academic demand, and how were they making sense of what we were asking them to do about if it mattered for them or not? So I'm working on some information for academic advisors about how we share information in different ways, how we think about autistic processing, and kind of detail level processing up instead of up level down. Like, how might we account for that in our regular practice? And then the third is about making space. So as higher ed professionals, I want to support and encourage autistic leadership. I want to mentor and sponsor autistic students and offer opportunities for connections, like outside of myself, but really think about how do we make sure that autistic students are able to access those research opportunities, or are able to access those internships, or even being a peer instructor for a class. Like, what are ways that I can think about opportunities and connections that are valuable? So there were limitations to my study. Certainly, my participants, it's qualitative study. There were only 8 of them, and I got them through the College Autism Network and the Autism Self-Advocacy Network. Many folks came through that recruiting, and I just have to acknowledge that those folks often are either connected with their college already, with a college program, or the Autism Self-Advocacy Network. They did some leadership training about autism, so they may be a little further along in their kind of autistic identity development, and more critical of the institutional norms than your average autistic student, across the board. They've just had some additional connection there. So the timing of this, I did it over one summer. It's just after COVID. So everybody that I talked to is everybody's experiences were a little odd, because all of our experiences were a little odd at that time. And then as a researcher, in the future, I would like to work with autistic co-researchers. I did defer to folks, and I did, work with autistic colleagues about my question, about guiding my questions, etc. But I would like to think about that in a different way. So some future things I'm excited about. But how does neurodivergent social cognition impact moral and ethical development? Man, I think that's really interesting. When I study lots of moral development things, there's a lot of stuff about, how the social pressure plays into things, plays into how your moral understanding. And if that social pressure is processed in a different way, like, what does that matter? I don't think it means that autistic folks don't have moral and ethical development. That's not what it means at all. But I think we have to think about it a little differently. The fact that of my 8 participants, 3 of them are transgender or non-binary identified, I think, we need to look at that. There's significant work to be done there. The mental health of autistic college students and the way that college environments contribute to that is something I want to look into. And then I'm also interested in how do autistic college students then who transition to college, how do they transition into those next roles of employment? So those are things that I'm looking at for next. All right. I'm sorry my slides didn't work as I would have wanted.
No
but
worries.
I think that's where I'm at.
Excellent, Carolyn. This was great. We have just about 7 minutes for questions. There were several already put into the chat.
Oh, good. Yeah, I closed the chat because that's distracting for me. All right.
Yeah, let's, Summer, I see your hands raised, so we'll go to yours first, and then we'll go to the few in the chat. So we'll just aim, in the interest of time, to keep the questions and answers relatively brief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead,
Brett.
Summer.
Thanks, Carolyn. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
All
my
good.
voice is terrible. I'm dealing with some kind of throat issue. Thank you for sharing this, Carolyn. I just wanted to ask, and I apologize for how technical this question is, but I wanted to ask if you could just talk briefly a little bit more about your coding strategy. You did mention it, you didn't really elaborate, and I know that's probably not
Sure.
add to your PowerPoint, but I am autistic and I do narrative research as well. And I really prioritize narratives of autistic participants. So I'm interested in why you said you used a 5-step process and then it didn't really work for you. When did you realize that this wasn't working? And anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah. Well, Summer, I mean, this was my first real go round with this, right? And so, you know, a little bit, you're like, okay, I'll do that. That one looks good, you know, and it did. It was working, but I felt really unsure. I really didn't. I struggled a little bit with narrative research, with this concept of like, I'm going to re-story, like I'm going to listen to all these autistic stories and then re-story that in a different way. And I just felt like, I don't think I'm I don't think that I should be I don't want to be a filter, right? Because I don't think there's one experience. I think there's many experiences. And I think I worked that through. I think in the end, I did okay. I didn't default to that. But as I was, I used Atlas TI, and I did narrative coding, and I did axial code. I did different. Now I can't remember each step, but you know, I really focused on what is this and what is this and what is this. But first, before I put it forth as one story, right, as the way that I was going to put forward with my findings, I wanted to make sure that I had the individual, that I understood, that I captured the correct codes and experiences per person. So first, I did a couple of rounds of coding, and I wrote a individual narrative summary. So I said, like, essentially, like, welcome, not welcome, but I'd like to introduce you to Bo. And here's Bo's experience. Here's a whole thing about Bo's experience, almost like a journalistic interview of Bo's experience. Here's who Bo is. And then I sent it to Bo and said, all right, what do you think? Is this you? Did I capture it? What do you think? And Bo replied with maybe like, yes, yes, that's great. Or replied with, I don't think you captured, I don't think that's really what happened. So I then deferred to what Bo said. We worked that out. And then when I did my coding, where I came up really with my findings and how am I going to structure this, I did go back to read my transcripts, etc. But I also included that summary, because I knew that it had an extra set of eyes on it too. So that's what I did. So I went through and did different rounds of coding. I used Atlas TI. I read everything. I was able to reconnect over and over again. Does this fit here? Does this fit here? And some of it, does that fit into relevance? Does that fit into belonging? I had to figure that out as I went. So we can talk more. I can show you, kind of here's my steps if you'd like, offline too. Yeah.
Carolyn, I'm seeing 5 questions in the chat, and we
Okay.
have 5 minutes left. So
okay. So talk faster.
Yeah.
Okay.
So first one that I'm seeing is from Tony. Did using disability theory as your framework limit your opportunities to express the strengths of the autistic experience in any way?
Oh, Tony, I think that's a good question. Perhaps. And as I wrote my proposal, I really thought about that. I really struggled with, like, is it disability? I really struggled with, like, where does this fall, right? Is this disability? Is it neurodiversity? Is it, and then I just tried to kind of take the best of everything and say, but here's how I am strengths focused on this. And sure, there's disability here, but I do think it's because the institution is disabling to people, right? Because the way that we set it up is this way. And that is true both for autistic students and also students with other disabilities. So I don't know that it did, but I did struggle with that a little bit. Like, how am I going to make that make sense in my own brain?
Great. We have another question. This is from Mark, who asks, how did you operationally define persistence?
Yes. So I used the college transition. I don't remember exactly which one, but I used kind of like the studies of college transition and kind of our professional organization to say that persistence in this study is defined as the moving from one year to another, from the first year into the second year into the third, et cetera. So while I wanted to be sure that there were people who went from one year into the next, I didn't limit it to only second year students. I mean, it was anybody, but I wanted to see folks who were able to persist through that. Yeah.
Awesome. Jeff feels that the theatrical framing is interesting. Are you considering adapting your dissertation into a theatrical form?
I want to, I'm on pause because right now I just want to get research, I just want to have some publications that are researchy. But some of the students that I worked with, some of the participants were like very theatrically focused, and man, I would love to work with them about how do we make this into some series of vignettes or monologues or whatever. So I'm on pause. I thought about that for a minute, and then I thought about that for a minute, like, ooh, I think I could do this like a play. I kind of got like way into it, I nerded out. And then I was like, I will give my committee members heart attacks if I turn in a script and not a research paper. So I'm not going to focus on that yet. But I think it will come. I think it may come forward, I do. But I'd like to work with autistic folks in getting there, whether they be the participants that came forward in this study or others.
Fantastic. Jacob asks, do you agree that your participants' use of theatrical language correlates with the common autistic need to apply meaning to their existence, like it's a story?
Oh. Yeah, well, you've given me something to think about. Yeah, I do think that. And I also wonder if there's not this meta understanding, from years of from my own son's, it's not my experience, my years of my son's experience, right? This like meta understanding of like, when you do this, they feel this, and the focus has been on making the other people respond to you in the way that you want them to. I mean, that's theatrical training, but it's also, what my son was in first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, about how to make friends class, so it is this, if you do, there's just some meta awareness there. So that's interesting. I'm gonna capture that. I'm gonna write that down and reflect on that in my next, hour. Yeah.
Awesome. And I know we're at time, but we have one more question from Lauren. Do you have suggestions or examples of how universities can make the shift toward a culture of appreciation for the autism community?
Yeah, I don't have it exactly yet. But I thought the words that they used were so interesting. And particularly as I've presented this about belonging in particular, in higher ed settings, people, we are like often kind of proud of ourselves about talking about accommodations and not being thoughtful about this, etc. But the word itself does indicate an exception is being made for you. So, I mean, I think including universal design as part of the expectation of how we do things is part of that. I think people still have to advocate, I can, universal design is only as universal as I can think of in my brain, right? Right. Of what people need. So I don't have the answer, but I think universal design is part of that. And just thinking in general about the ways that we train faculty, et cetera. Students had like pretty haunting experiences with faculty members who were, raise your hand if you have a disability, I better not see a laptop in my class. Oh, well, except you, So, I think we have a ways to go, even in how we do accommodations well, but I think we do have to think about the language. I don't have the answer yet.
Carolyn, thank you so much. This was
Thank you all.
fantastic. Really great contributions from everybody. Really glad you could join us for this Canvas meeting. We will see you all back here on Friday, September 15th for a presentation from our colleagues at CUNY, College of Staten Island, to talk about emerging research on the narrative writing of autistic students. We'll see you all then, and in the coming days, you'll see an email from me on the Canvas listserv with a meeting recording and meeting minutes. And yeah, thank you, Carolyn. Wishing you the best of luck in further getting
Thank
this
you
work
all
out.
so much for your your rolling with me as my slides weren't moving. So I really appreciate it. Yeah. And I'm happy to answer questions. So thank you.